Hi, this is Shane Starr with Reflections on Religion. This morning we are going to be talking about atheism, specifically looking at it as a belief, which in fact it is. So, most people think that atheism is just the standard and that it takes additional faith or some sort of belief to have faith in God. But I want to turn that around and take a look at atheism in the same sort of way. Because the longer I examine the top arguments from people like Stephen Hawking, for all intents and purposes, is sort of turned into an atheist in his later years. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Leonard Mlodinow. These people have made each their own case, all sort of related for atheism. And I think oftentimes in our defense of Christianity, we don't take a look at the other side. Maybe some of us are afraid to look at the other side. Well, I opened Pandora's box and dove right in. And here's as objective as I can be about the topic. These are my thoughts on it. So again, I want to make it clear, this isn't a video to prove Christianity or the Catholic religion or anything like that. This is a video rather examining the assumptions that atheism asks us to accept. Because when you really unpack the belief, atheism's not so much a matter of faith, it's a faith in a different explanation of reality. So I have a series of points I'm going to make, not totally related, but collectively they ought to make my main point, which I'll come to at the end. So, point one, can something really come from nothing? In the beginning of my series, that was the question. How can we explain that there's anything at all? Atheism claims that the universe either always existed or emerged from nothing naturally. Let's think about what nothing really is for a second. Nothing isn't simply empty space. It's not quantum foam. It's the absence of everything. Everything. That is the absence of matter, the absence of laws, the absence of energy, the absence of time, the absence of causation. If you can even imagine such a state, if nothing, absolutely nothing existed, then nothing could possibly happen. Think about that. In a state of nothingness, nothing can happen. It's pretty simple if you think about it. Nothing has no potential. Nothing has no power. Nothing has no laws. Out of nothing, nothing comes. All right. So, alternatively, at least Christianity proposes an eternal mind or spirit or some entity behind existence. But if you're thinking of the universe popping in, the Big Bang coming from nothing, that's what you need to have faith in. That's what you have to accept, is that existence emerged from non-existence without any explanation. It just is a brute fact. Okay, point two. Let's say that the universe has always existed. Let's say the universe has just been there forever. At some point in forever, well, not only would everything would have happened by now because it would have had forever to get here, but at some point matter, inanimate matter, rocks, dust, dirt, somehow matter became life. So even if we grant matter pre-existing forevermore, how does dead matter become living cells? Atoms are not alive. Molecules, electrons are not consciousness. They aren't conscious. When we think of chemistry, yes, it explains reactions, but it doesn't explain the origin of life itself. When we think of computers, no one witnesses computer parts randomly assembling into a functioning operating system. It doesn't work that way. DNA is coded information. Information naturally comes from intelligence, not from nothing, not from inanimate objects. We never observe meaningful code of any kind arising accidentally. Yet, if we're to believe in atheism, I'm supposed to assume that just blind chemistry eventually wrote the equivalent of biological software. The issue isn't just matter existing. The issue is organized, information-rich, self-replicating life. Okay, that brings me really to point 3. It's consciousness from unconscious matter. How does unconscious matter become conscious? That's something that the best of atheist scientists can't tell us. And that's, ironically, that's one of the main problems that have caused many atheists, if not turning into Christians themselves, they've at least become theists on this basis. How does unconscious matter become conscious? How does non-awareness become awareness? Neurons firing, yes, those are physical events, but subjective experiences, love, fear, beauty, meaning, self-awareness, everything that makes us human, everything that even makes animals conscious and be able to act, this is something deeper. We can explain the chemistry of the brain through scans and modern technology, on and on. But chemistry, biology itself does not explain why there is an inner experiencer at all. So matter has quantity, consciousness has quality, and physical descriptions never quite arrive to explain subjective experience. So atheism, to sum up, asks me to believe that particles which are themselves unconscious somehow assembled randomly into beings capable of reason, morality, imagination, and self-awareness. At some point, atheism stops sounding like a scientific belief and begins to sound like some sort of mystical faith itself. Okay, and that brings me to point 4. Even with these atheists who are brilliant minds, and don't get me wrong, I've met many intelligent, thoughtful atheists who could probably hear this video and still disagree. I don't see how they can disagree completely, but they might have reservations, or they would agree with me to a point and then have reservations about where I jump off from there, which we'll get to momentarily. But as brilliant as these people are, I've looked into the biographies of all of them. You can check yourself online. There's plenty of information out there. Their ultimate arguments are not necessarily scientific at all. They're emotional in themselves. They had relatives who went through the Holocaust. They have medical conditions that threaten their belief in a just God. They usually employ some form of the problem of evil, which we went over last week. but the center of their arguments isn't really scientific. It's rather resentment towards religion, anger at suffering, outrage at Christian hypocrisy, some form of the problem of evil, oftentimes driven by political motives as well. Most atheist arguments, really, if we're being 100% real right now, they really come down to the problem of evil. Why would God allow suffering? Religion has caused harm in the world. Christians are hypocrites. And although I believe in a just God, let me make one point crystal clear. If every religious person on earth were proven to be a hypocrite today, right now, if God was somehow proven to be less than perfectly just or wonderful, that still does not explain how nothing became something and how inanimate matter became conscious. It's not a proof against God's existence at all. Okay, point 5. And this goes back to our brilliant atheists. If you read their work, they speak pretty much across the board. They speak of the universe in a reverent way. They almost, you could substitute the universe for God, and then our beliefs are pretty much in alignment. You know, they talk about the universe being mysterious. They talk about it being eternal. They talk about being creative. They talk about being the source of morality, the source of meaning. I remember reading Stephen Hawking's latest work before his death, and I was thinking, you replaced God with gravity, I think he literally gave gravity a capital G, I don't know if that's for a rhetorical effect or not, but you might as well have given it a capital G, the way he spoke of gravity as this amazing, mysterious force that's responsible for everything. It's like, okay, just replace that with God, and now we're talking about the same thing, I think that, yes, we and the atheists agree that there's an ultimate reality behind existence that's mysterious. The disagreement is whether that reality is personal or impersonal. Or, you could say super personal, which is in a way impersonal. But I think that many, if not most, if not in some way all of our atheist figures, they reject the word God not because God is fairy tale unbelievable. No, it's because the word God implies accountability. It implies moral authority. It implies the limitation of personal autonomy, and it implies the requirement of a relational existence. And I think, as Kierkegaard and many philosophers before me, even Nietzsche himself, an atheist with a Christian father, I might add, even Nietzsche said, it's not the belief that is so off-putting to him, it's the rebellion against authority. So the objection to theism isn't transcendence itself, it's the type of transcendence that religious people believe in. It's really transcendence with authority. That's what they don't like. So point 6, I'll bring it back to scripture. In Psalms 14, first verse, the fool says in his heart there is no God. I think a lot of us gloss over that phrase and we think, yeah, the fool says in his heart there's no God. Notice it doesn't say the scientist says in his mind there's no God, or our thinking says there's no God. No, the fool says in his heart there's no God. Again, it's not about failure to understand or see creation and know that it implies a source. it's rebellion. It's the problem's not with our minds, it's with our hearts. So along with this verse, I would say unbelief isn't an intellectual conclusion. It's relational. It's an act of rebellion. Humanity pushes away transcendence with authority. We resist dependence. We resist accountability. We definitely resist surrender. Even those of us who believe, I can tell you firsthand, the concept of surrender is difficult. But as we learned in our earlier videos, faith isn't about just believing facts about a creator or God. It's about a relationship. It's about orientation towards God. It's about love. So my final conclusion, just to sum up the points I made, faith in atheism requires nothing producing everything, dead matter producing life, unconscious matter producing consciousness, objective morality emerging from chemical survival mechanisms, and rationality emerging from blind accident. A lot of agnostics as well as atheists will say, I would like to believe, but I just don't have enough faith. And I would answer that after examining the best authorities on atheism, the best writers on the subject, I simply do not have enough faith to be an atheist. That's all I have for today. See you guys next week. God bless.